They say animals forget. That time erases everything. But what if I told you that wasn't true? This is the story of a gorilla who waited for me. Years ago, before life took me in a different direction, I had a best friend. Not a classmate, not a pet, but a gorilla. We were inseparable. We played, we learned, and in some strange way, we understood each other. But then, I had to leave. Life moved on. And I always wondered, did he forget me? After all these years, I decided to go back, to see if he was still there, and if he remembered me. What happened next? I never could have expected. I still remember the first time I saw him. I was just a child, wide-eyed and curious, standing outside the enclosure at the wildlife sanctuary. He was small then, barely more than a baby, clinging to his mother's side. But something about him was different. While the other gorillas played or rested, he watched me. Not with fear, not with caution, just curiosity. It was like he was studying me as much as I was studying him. Day after day, I kept coming back. At first, I would just sit there, watching him, letting him get used to me. Then one day, something changed. He moved closer. I remember holding out my hand, not expecting anything, but he reached back, his tiny fingers wrapping around mine through the fence. In that moment, something unspoken passed between us. A connection, a silent understanding. From that day forward, we were inseparable. I gave him a name. I don't know if he understood it, but whenever I called, he would come. We played our own little games, sometimes simple ones, like mimicking each other's movements. Other times just sitting together, side by side, as if words weren't needed. I would talk to him, tell him about my day, my thoughts, my dreams. And in his own way, he listened. He wasn't just an animal to me. He was my friend. But time has a way of pulling people apart. One day, I had to leave. I was too young to understand the finality of it all. I remember promising him I would come back, not realizing how many years would pass before I could. Not realizing that life had a way of moving forward, even when you weren't ready. For years, I wondered, did he forget me? Did he even think about me at all? Or had I been just another visitor in a life filled with passing faces? The thought haunted me. And then, one day, I decided to find out. The journey back felt unreal. The road was familiar, yet everything seemed different. Wider, quieter, almost like time had stretched the distance. I had imagined this moment so many times, picturing every possible outcome. Would he recognize me? Would he even still be there? Part of me was excited, but another part was terrified. What if I had been wrong all along? What if I had only imagined that our bond was special? As the car pulled up to the sanctuary gates, my heart pounded. The sign was still the same, weathered by time, but standing strong. I stepped out, taking a deep breath, letting the air fill my lungs. It smelled like it used to, earthy, warm, alive. Memories flooded back, but I pushed them aside. This wasn't the past. This was now. Walking through the familiar paths, I could hear the sounds of the sanctuary, birds chirping, leaves rustling, distant animal calls. Each step felt heavier, like I was walking toward something I wasn't fully prepared for. Then, finally, I saw it. The enclosure. The place where we had spent so many hours together. I stopped, my breath caught in my throat. There he was. Older now, bigger, stronger. His fur was darker, his presence more commanding. But it was him. He sat near the center of the enclosure, surrounded by the others, calm and still. My feet felt frozen in place. I wanted to call his name, to reach out, but suddenly, I wasn't sure if I should. He didn't move. He didn't react. Had I been gone too long? Had I become just another forgotten face in his past? A lump formed in my throat. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe some bonds weren't meant to last forever, but I had come too far to turn back now. Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward. And then, in a voice that felt both foreign and familiar, I called his name. For a moment, nothing happened. He didn't turn, didn't move, just sat there, staring off into the distance. My heart sank. Maybe I had been wrong. Maybe I had built up this moment in my head, convinced myself that he would remember, that what we had meant something. I felt the weight of disappointment pressing down on me, but I refused to look away. Then, just as I was about to accept the truth, he shifted. It was small at first, a tilt of the head, a slow blink. His ears twitched. And then, finally, he turned. Our eyes met. Everything around me disappeared. The sounds of the sanctuary, the people, the years that had passed. It was just the two of us, staring at each other across the space that time had created. I held my breath, waiting, hoping. And then, in a movement so subtle yet so powerful, he leaned forward. He studied me, his deep, dark eyes scanning my face, searching for something. And then, recognition. It was like a light had flickered on inside him. His posture changed, his eyes widened, and before I could even process what was happening, he was moving. He came closer, his massive hands pressing against the barrier, his breath visible in the cool air. I felt frozen, my mind racing to catch up with my emotions. Then, as if no time had passed at all, he reached out, just like he had all those years ago. Tears welled in my eyes as I slowly lifted my hand, pressing it against the glass where his fingers rested on the other side. He didn't look away. He didn't hesitate. He remembered. All those years, all that time apart. And he had waited for me. I don't know how long we stayed like that, hands pressed against the glass, lost in a moment that felt frozen in time. It didn't matter how many years had passed. It didn't matter that we had lived separate lives in different worlds. He remembered. And in that moment, I knew that the bond we had shared was real. It had always been real. A lump formed in my throat as I thought about everything this moment meant. We often think of animals as just creatures of instinct, driven by survival, incapable of emotions like ours. But looking into his eyes, I knew that wasn't true. He didn't just recognize me. He had waited. Somewhere, deep inside, he had held onto a memory, a connection that time couldn't erase. I wanted to say something, to tell him I was sorry for leaving, to explain why it had taken me so long to come back. But no words felt big enough for what I was feeling. So instead, I just stayed there, letting him see me, letting him know that I hadn't forgotten him either. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, I knew I couldn't stay forever. I had to leave again, and this time, I had no idea if I'd ever return. But as I took a step back, he didn't panic. He didn't turn away. He just watched me, calm, steady, as if he understood. Maybe he knew that goodbyes were just a part of life. Maybe he had always known I would come back in some way, somehow. Or maybe, just maybe, he was telling me that no matter how far I went, no matter how much time passed, he would always be waiting. As I took my final steps away from the enclosure, I turned back one last time. He was still there, watching me, his eyes following my every move. There was no sadness, no desperation, just understanding. It was as if he knew this wasn't truly the end, that what we had would never fade, no matter the distance between us. I took a deep breath, letting the moment settle in my heart. This wasn't just a reunion. It was proof that love, connection, and memory aren't limited to humans. That the bonds we share with animals can be just as deep, just as real, and just as unbreakable. I know not everyone will believe this story. Some might say I imagined it, that animals don't have the capacity for memory and emotion like we do. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And I know that somewhere, in his own way, he had been waiting for me just as much as I had been waiting for him. If you've ever shared a bond with an animal, if you've ever felt something you couldn't quite explain, Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your stories. And if this touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe, because there are so many more incredible stories to tell. But before you go, I have one last question for you. If you had the chance to reunite with an animal you once loved, do you think they would remember you?